Erin Grady. I'm a member of the ASAE Young Professionals Committee. I'm also the Manager of Education and Knowledge Management with the Global Cold Chain Alliance. On behalf of the Young Professionals Advisory Committee, I'd like to welcome you to today's live panel. The discussion topic today is growing community virtually. I'll be moderating today's discussion. We'll begin today's live discussion with intros from each of our panelists. And again, feel free to feel free to ask questions at any time in the chat box there. And I see folks participating with our icebreaker question. Hello from Vancouver, Leesburg. Hello from Laurel, Maryland. Thanks to everyone for joining. So we'll go ahead and ask our panelists to introduce themselves today. Alexis R., can I start with you, please?
Sure. So my name is Alexis Redmond. I'm ASHA's Director of Career Management Resources, and I'm a former member of the Young Professional Advisory Committee way back when, so it's good to be here today.
Thanks for making the time. Appreciate it. And Alexis S., I saw you jump when I said Alexis. So go ahead next, please.
That's going to be lots of fun today. So hi, everyone. I'm Alexis Simoneau in Tallahassee, Florida. I am an account manager on the Map Dynamics team for Next Tech AR.
Thanks for being here today. And Genevieve, please.
Sure. Genevieve Borello, Senior Manager of Member Engagement at Actful. And I am also a YP Advisory Committee alum. Once you join, you never get out, apparently. So welcome, everyone. Happy to have you here.
That's good to know, since this will be my, I'll be aging off the committee pretty soon, not to tell everyone my age, but I guess I'll probably still keep doing things like this. It's been a great experience. And we've got folks from Tallahassee, Damascus, Kansas City, all over the place today. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Arlington, Virginia, that's where I am as well. So hello, neighbor. So we'll start off with our first question, and this is going to be for all of our panelists today. Can you explain to us what networking means for you and what you think the point of a networking interaction might be? So we're going to have all of you guys answer this question. Alexis S., you're off mute. Do you want to get us started?
Sure. So networking to me is building connections and relationships for mutual gain, but all the while making the world just a little bit more connected and compassionate.
Great. Nice answer. Thanks. Very succinct.
I was ready for that one.
Yeah, awesome. Genevieve, or Alexis R., I see you off mute. Sorry, Genevieve.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I am a lifelong learner, and I find that I've learned the best things from just engaging and meeting with people. So being an introvert, I might not love a huge crowd, but having that one-on-one connection, being able to peel that onion to learn more about people's past, their experiences, and all that dynamic makes networking so special to me.
Thank you. Genevieve, go ahead.
Yeah, I am a combination of both. So networking for me is that personal gain, maybe a little, is finding people to help me grow my career, help me sort of move to that next step. But it's also, I'm clearly an extrovert. I really just love meeting people and getting to know them, and having a diverse network is just really important for me. So like, I have people that I maybe met a couple times, never going to really connect with them or ever see them again, but they're in my network and I know they're always there if I need them for something. So it's really important to have those relationships and opportunities that they represent for you, I guess.
Great, thanks. We've got a couple of great answers from folks in the chat as well. Someone says that networking to them is about building meaningful connections and relationships. That's a really nice answer. Someone else says it can be very valuable in many ways, including professional growth, personal growth, and obtaining knowledge from peers. And someone else says that they wonder, what should I say? That's the first thing they think of for networking, and I can definitely relate to that. So thanks, guys, for participating, and keep throwing your thoughts in the chat today. We'll move on to our next question. What's your approach to finding or creating your professional network? Genevieve, maybe you can get us started off with that one.
I have been called an aggressive networker. I just tend to like meet everyone and I try to know everyone. That's just who I am. But for me, I have no shame about approaching people, and I know it works differently for everyone. Some people are very just fearful of just walking up to strangers and talking to them. I have no shame in that. So if I see you and I'm like, hey, I kind of know your name from somewhere, where do I know that? I definitely will lead with that. Or if I'll be like, hey, I know your name from ASC's Collaborate or something. I'll definitely try to make those connections, sort of show that we have something in common. So I'm not a complete stranger and axe murderer, but I definitely feel like the more people in my network, the better for me, better for them. I think it's all about associations, those connections, because it is a small kind of world that we live in associations. You do tend to run into the same people over and over at meetings. And so having them in your network can be really powerful for you. So I am aggressive networking is my motto. Just go for it is what I say.
I love that, Genevieve.
Casting a wide net. That's a good approach. Alexis R., how about you? What's your approach to creating your professional network?
So my approach to creating my professional network is really intentional, because like where Genevieve is aggressive and like she'll get in there and mess it up with people. I'm more of that. I have to be held accountable to engage with others. I'm more introverted. So like with ASAE and my network that I have now, it came from joining a committee. Like I was like, if I want to be a part of this, I want to make this my career, tribe, I have to join. And so that's why I keep doing is showing up the places where I know I would be compelled to come out of my shell, just because I know that's a comfort zone thing for me. I'm like, I'll just hang back and observe. So it's like, no. So I will stand next to Genevieve because I know she'll make me talk. So that's how I navigate network.
So you're intentional about your approach to putting yourself in situations where you'll have to interact with folks. I can really relate to that. Forcing myself to moderate panels like this is one way of doing it. Alexis S., do you want to comment on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think it's definitely helpful to kind of have a goal in mind and figure out what you're trying to get out of it or how you want to contribute to the community. So if you're a member, maybe it's not just the personal gain, but I'm an includer. That's one of my strengths. So it's really important to me to engage people within a community. So before I even worked on the sales side of our industry, where it's literally my job to be a networker, when I was involved in FSAE, I was always trying to engage new members and things like that. So just being aware of where you feel like you can contribute or kind of being ready for those networking environments, I think helps give you some peace when you show up and you're like, oh my gosh, there's this networking reception. What do I do?
I'm gonna add to that. So I think that knowing your circle and kind of being a wing person, like what Alexis said, like having that person is really valuable, especially if you're new and you don't know anyone. Like I, as a networker, I'm happy to be like, what do you want? What are you trying to get? Who are you trying to meet? I'm happy to connect you with that person. And so having that kind of person in your network is really valuable too. So kind of identifying people who are the aggressive networkers can be really valuable to you if you aren't comfortable necessarily making those approaches yourself, I think. Great.
Thanks for jumping in there. And you guys kind of, you touched on this a bit, especially Alexis R., you touched on this. I don't know if you want to expand on how you recommend breaking out of your comfort zone. You mentioned joining groups, putting yourself in situations where you would, need to network and be around folks, particularly in a virtual world. Any recommendations on breaking out of comfort zones?
Yeah, no, to break out of the comfort zone, it's really important to kind of, like Alexis said, having your goals in mind. So there are times that, like, I became a new mother last year, so I was really interested in meeting a lot of other association parents who are figuring out how to make all this work. And so with that, it kind of encouraged me to, engage more, find different ways to find people to chat with. So I was going to just a lot of random events. So Nicole Araujo from Mighty Citizen hosts a morning coffee chat at 8:30 every day, and then they have a happy hour. And so at first I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna go, but then my CAE mentor was there. She's like, hey, just come. And so now I go probably 3 to 4 times a week, and I learned so much from all those people. But what I've kind of found in trying to be effective in those spaces is that I, spend that time to observe, but then I figure out ways to say like, hey, you mentioned something in the chat. I would love to have another 30 minutes with you to learn more. And so just taking that time to then take that next step with people, because it can be very easy, even in in-person spaces, to just be there in the group and just be another face in the crowd. But being in a virtual space, we're all in these squares now, but being able to get to the chat and say like, hey, I love your necklace, like I would, where'd you get that? And being able to start making those connections, even though you're in an informal space and we would in person, can be really helpful, particularly if that's not your comfort zone. because there's still that ability to have that one-on-one, even in rooms like this. And it's easier than if you're in person. You don't have that awkward, like, hey, come over here and talk to me. Instead, I can just chat you.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And that also has to do with really engaging with these online opportunities, I think. Not just sitting there with your webinar or your meeting playing in the background, but really engaging with the chat and with what's going on, even though we all have some Zoom fatigue at this point. Genevieve, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so we had a question about networking and virtual meetings, and I think Alexis kind of touched on it, but I think it actually is easier to network virtually because you can privately message people and you don't have to have the awkward face-to-face that some people don't like to have. And I think you can do really easy little things like, hey, you mentioned this tool. Can you send me an email more about your experience about it? Can we set up a quick little meeting about it, 15 minutes? But I think virtual networking can actually be easier because it's sometimes easier to identify people that might have something that you're interested in, or vice versa. I mean, networking it's a two-way flow, right? Like you might have things that other people can offer. So making sure that people might be aware of what you know about or what you're offering and knowledgeable about. So making sure that in the virtual world, you sort of have that profile out there and putting your name out there. And what the nice thing about virtual is, and this is being recorded, you can ghost people. Like it's not nice, but it happens. But it makes it a little less awkward, especially if you're just not comfortable at all responding to someone. But I think virtual connecting is really easier to make that ask and talking to people, especially because I think now everyone's just used to getting a LinkedIn invite with someone maybe they met once and you just chat like, hey, would you have time to meet with me? So I think it makes it easier, but you just have to sort of be more purposeful, like Alexis keeps saying, is about why you're connecting with them. So that the spray and pray method doesn't always work sometimes virtually. So you might have to be a little more strategic in your virtual networking, I think.
Great. Alexis S., any comments on breaking out of comfort zones when networking, or we kind of moved into talking also about the nuances between virtual and in person?
So for breaking out of your comfort zone, I always say the worst thing that could happen is someone ignores you or says no, and that's really not that bad. So I just kind of prepare myself when I am reaching out to people with that in mind. And then along those lines is just making sure that you are being authentic and genuine when you are reaching out to people. I mean, you're not going to necessarily go to well, I guess it depends on the organization, but you may not ask your CEO, hey, CEO, can I have an hour of your time for lunch? And I think just being really, like I said, intentional about what you're asking for and why. And maybe that meeting can and what I do think is handy on online is having more conversations like casually over LinkedIn or maybe in the private chat on Zoom. I'm a massive proponent of LinkedIn. If LinkedIn didn't exist, this would be very, very difficult. But we also, of course, have great tools like Collaborate. So I think that comes in handy. But David asked, how do you network effectively in virtual meetings? And I think that sure, there are ways where it can be easier, but it is still a little challenging to nurture a brand new connection online. And I think part of that is being really good at asking questions. And I have a couple that I brought to share, and it just gives you this, like, you're in the same industry most likely. And three of my favorite questions to ask on LinkedIn are, what are some of the projects you've been working on that you've been particularly excited about? What are some challenges you're working through? And then what did you learn in 2020? Or how did your association come out in 2020? What was that like for you? And I've had some people respond to be like, hey, want to talk about it over Zoom? Or maybe just chatting in Zoom about the chat. It's been really interesting to see how that works to get people talking.
Thanks for that. And David also said in the chat that it's not easy to go around and introduce yourself when the meeting host doesn't create that opportunity. And that's true, David. And I think something like that, when we're moderating these types of panels, we try to ask questions where folks can respond in the chat and encourage that sort of back and forth between the attendees. That way you could maybe find something you might have in common with an attendee. Often in these types of environments, it's difficult to get everyone to go around the room. That takes up half the time of your meeting, so it's just not practical. But I hear you on that. It's definitely hard to connect when there's no opportunity to say, hey, here I am, here's who I am, and here's why I'm here. So with that in mind, I do have a question for the attendees. And it sounds like we have a mix of this on our panel, but are you an introvert or an extrovert? And expanding on that, do you find it easier or harder to network virtually? I think as an introvert, I find it easier. But Alexis R., any comments? I saw you come off mute there.
Yeah, no, I'm an introvert. I find networking virtually is easier. And it's also easier because I'm able to engage with people at various levels. I kind of mentioned this in the chat because for a lot of the webinars I've gotten on, like when there's conversation and dialogue happening, you know, you have kind of like a thread to kind of riff off of to say like why you want to engage with that person. So like with someone saying that you can't reach out to your CEO, like my CEO is really into civil discourse and is leading one of the teams with ASAE about that for Power Bay. And so when she posted something about it, just internally, I reached out to her and said, hey, I'd love to learn more about what you're hearing in terms of the research. And that just gave her a reason for her to kind of like vomit all this information. And I had asked for 30 minutes and I got over an hour. And so that's the thing virtually, is that you're getting that immediate ability to research topics they're interested in. So then you can kind of figure out like, well, what's that hook? Like, what is that thing that they're really into right now? And say, hey, you know, I saw that you're posting a lot about this. I saw an article in Harvard Business Review. What did you think about this? Let's set up some time and talk about it. So that's a lot easier than being in a reception where everyone's just kind of like talking about the food. Because after a while, like that ends really quickly. That all of a sudden you're like, yeah, the cheese is good. So how's the weather? Versus, you know, hey, I saw you shared an article and now we can talk about that. So that's where that's been easier for me.
I think age also has something to do with it. So I know like when I was brand new in the field, I would not have been as aggressive networker as I am now, but with a little bit of tenure, I realized it's kind of what Alexa said. The worst they can say is no, or just ignore you. Like, I don't care. I'm gonna move on and find someone else that'll help me. So I think being a little more tenured, it helps. But I think that the younger white young professional should also realize the value of networking and that you shouldn't be afraid. Like, a lot of people want to help you. Like, I love mentoring the people I oversee, and I love working with the next group because I love associations. I want to show my passion and why we got involved. And so having that kind of middleman, like, I'm happy to connect you to that CEO position. If you're afraid of approaching them directly, I am happy to help you facilitate that. So I think when you're younger, it might be a little more scary than now that we're a little more tenured. So I think we have to keep that in mind as well.
Well, I think too, and maybe not everybody likes to over prepare for networking environments, but I share the feeling of walking into a reception room alone and you're like, oh my gosh, where do I start? But I think the reason why people have a negative opinion of networking is because they think that the conversation won't be meaningful. So if you're the person that's afraid of where the conversation will go, then have those questions handy so that you can manage the conversation and be sure that you get something out of it, because I got better things to do than talk about cheese. I mean, I love cheese and I probably enjoy talking about cheese because I like it. But I'd also, like, if I'm in a room with association professionals, I want to geek out about my job and what I do and what I like, what I'm struggling with, things like that. But this, I listened to on the Happiness Lab podcast, and there was this study of people who were sitting on a subway train, and how basically people have an expectation that they will not enjoy meeting strangers. They think that the stranger is going to be annoying, but of that study, they found that everybody actually enjoyed meeting the stranger. And so people think that, they just have these expectations that I think they'll be delighted by if they kind of go into it knowing that they might get something out of it.
Great point, Alexis. Thanks very much. And, just to counter the cheese talk, I would love to talk about cheese with anyone. So feel free to have a conversation with me about cheese. That's one of my favorite topics. More than happy to talk about that. But all joking aside, I did want to point out a comment in the chat from Brian, who is one of our excellent networkers and extroverts. Thank you, Brian. He says, it's good to come armed with some great questions. And I think our panelists have talked about that as well. He says one of his favorite questions is saying, what's your story to folks, and hearing about their story as they tell it. So thanks for sharing that, Brian. Pepper Jack from Genevieve. Thanks, Genevieve. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. This is related to the nuances between networking in person and online. Zoom fatigue, screen fatigue. I think everyone is feeling it, especially after this past year, but even in general, you know, we're on our computers all the time. We're on our phones all the time. How do you guys manage your time battling Zoom fatigue and staying energized after all of your work obligations for online networking? Alexis S., do you want to go ahead and get us started with that question?
So I'm curious, poll for the crew, for my extroverted friends, like if it weren't for Zoom, I don't feel Zoom fatigue. Like I feel fatigue when I'm on camera all day, but that's just because I'm busy and I'm talking the whole time. I'd probably feel a similar sense of fatigue if I was walking around talking to people in real life all day. And questionably, maybe even more so because I was physically walking around. But I get a lot of energy out of it. So I've struggled with that with people because I don't really get it. But I think that, you know, like what we've shared in some of the 5-minute pieces is trying to find new ways of doing calls and walks and things like that. So I am curious for extroverts. Do you feel Zoom fatigue? If you want to share in the chat.
I'm just tired all the time, so I don't know if it's Zoom or just my life. So I can't help you there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, with having a baby last year, I think that exhaustion. So now, like being on Zoom all day is like, it's not that bad. I think giving Alexis as mentioned, giving the other options of ways to engage can be helpful, particularly if you're meeting someone new for the first time. So I reached out to somebody from ASE's board once and said, hey, I'd love to learn just a little bit about if you let me get 30 minutes. And she's like, well, I'm on the go. I can talk to you on the phone. And so I was pretty sure she was like, it's gonna be quick and we're gonna end it really quickly. She went shopping, she went to the grocery store. We talked for 2.5 hours. So the thing is that if a conversation is interesting and compelling, it's not exhausting, it's recharging. And when you're talking about things that maybe you haven't gotten to talk about in a long time, so I know at work, we're going project to project, it might be the same old kind of dialogues. Having a new and fresh perspective can definitely help to perk you back up. So, that's the thing. If you are being thoughtful when you're engaging with people, the conversation is going to be one that they're looking forward to, you're looking forward to, and you're going to, come into it charged up and leave probably even more charged up. I just think it's really smart to be thoughtful about considering different platforms, just because, with my son running around, it's going to be easier for me sometimes to talk to people, just being on the phone, or even just having, day-long text conversations than being on Zoom. So, if someone says no to a Zoom, don't think it's because they don't actually want to interact. It might just be they prefer a different channel.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just to consider doing phone calls or non-video meeting platforms of some sort. So being on all the time, someone in the chat said, is really the exhausting part, not necessarily the Zoom meeting itself, but when you're on video, you sort of have to be presenting yourself in a certain way. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Appreciate that. So if those are all your tips for battling Zoom fatigue, we'll go on to our next question. And we've been talking about this the whole time, but I certainly want to give you an opportunity to say something specific about this. Making meaningful connections virtually. We talked about making those connections, talking in the chat, getting on LinkedIn with folks and so on, but how do you make those connections meaningful versus just surface level? Do you guys have any tips on that? Alexis S? Every time, since you're off mute, I go ahead and run to you. I apologize for that.
Staying off mute. It's pretty chill over here. But I think like I said, is just being intentional and trying to focus on like like what does the other person have to gain about it, have to gain from it, and how can you help and contribute? So not necessarily like me first, but them first. And if it is me first, like just being clear, like, hey, I'm struggling with this, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I think is a good way of going about it.
Great.
Okay, so I think adding on that, I think the really having a purpose and sort of a plan before you go into it really helps. So if you can say, hey, I'm looking for ABC kind of things, are you able to help with any of those? Can we meet for a quick 15-minute call on blah, blah, blah dates? And giving that person sort of options and specific details about where you're looking for. Because I know for me, when I get emails that are just like, hey, can you help me? I'm like, what are you looking for? I have to like sometimes drag it out of the person, and that can sometimes add to the exhaustion of like email interactions. And you're like, just tell me what you need, tell me what you want, and if I can help, I'm happy to help. But you just have to be very clear and purposeful in what you're asking and how you ask it, and make sure that you have that plan so that when you do have that 15-minute call, you're not wasting time, like, I don't know, telling fluff stories or, I don't know, gossiping about cheese. So just making sure that it's a good use of both of your time too is really important.
No, I agree with everything that Alexis and Genevieve said. I think the other thing is just, making sure that you're showing you're actually interested in them. And so, when you start making that plan of what your ask is going to be of them, taking that time to go back and look at their LinkedIn or go back and look at things that they've published recently, just so that you can, for one, show that you know a little bit about them, how they can help you with whatever you're asking for, because then, it just helps to ensure that they're not being used, like they're not being disposable, where it's just like, hey, I'm looking to get into positions in membership. But if you've sent that email to 8 people, maybe that's not super helpful. But maybe if they've, posted something recently that, hey, I saw you talk about member value in this way. We have a challenge at our office. Could I hear about how you did X? Because it just helps to make sure that they know that you're actually thinking of them when you were networking and not just spraying and praying and just hitting everybody. It should feel like it's supposed to be a real conversation.
Thanks a lot for that, Alexis. And this is something that you guys keep touching on, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on it. You talk about being intentional with your networking and with your meetings with folks, and knowing about your asks in advance. What if you're not sure that you have an ask and you want to, you want to expand your network because in the future you might need to. You might need to reach out to someone for help, but you might not have an immediate ask. Can you still network virtually without an immediate ask?
I think that is an ask. You just say, hey, I don't necessarily have a specific thing I need at this point, but I would like to add you to my network because I see value in connecting with you, and I see value in your expertise that might help me down the road someday. So I think it is an ask, even if it's not a direct ask.
Gotcha. That's a good point.
That's like the number one thing I say when I reach out to people on LinkedIn is like, hey, would love to keep in touch with you here. Like that's my ask. And when they respond, when they confirm, I'll usually follow up. And depending on what I need to learn from folks, I'll follow up with a discussion question, because it's not really meaningful if all we are is connected on LinkedIn. So just depending on like the amount of time you have to spend on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I was going to say the other thing is that it's just like what Brian mentioned earlier, like, what's your story? I usually ask people like, hey, you seem really interesting. I'd love to hear your career journey. Because the thing is that, like, what we see on LinkedIn is one thing. That's like the curated, perfect framework of what you want to say about yourself. But there is a story for how that happened. So I want to hear about it. So that gives you a way to just like, ask, and then they can be excited to just talk about, all their experiences and how a mentor helped them get to here, or they moved here on a whim in a pickup truck, like whatever it is, you get to hear it. And like, that's something they can be excited about because they're the expert on it. They know what their life experience was.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So it's really interesting to reframe the ask of, can we expand our networks together and have that be the goal? That's really helpful to me. So thank you for answering that. We actually do have a couple of questions coming in from the chat as well. So I'm going to throw a few curveballs at you ladies today. Someone is asking how to identify potential network matches. You talked about obviously looking in the chats of virtual meetings and various things and seeing people you might be interested in connecting with, but do you have any other tips on identifying potential network matches?
Besides internet stalking, I think things like Collaborate clearly makes it really easy, because you can see people who may be sort of in the same job function or in the same industry. So I think the AI behind that makes it really easy. For LinkedIn, you can do things like you can see the circle of your world. So you see like who are secondhand connections. You have that connection already. So you can make the ask of your friend and say, hey, would you be willing to connect me to this person? Do you think I would be a good fit to network with them? So I think it is easy. You just have to dig in a little. Face-to-face is clearly a lot easier to do networking and just find random people. You can do things like, oh, you're a CAE, I'm a CAE, we're best friends now. Or you can do things like your earrings, they're amazing, tell me about them. But online, the online stalking is a little easier sometimes because you can just kind of go incognito and snoop around. But again, you just kind of have to find that in, whether it's you have a friend, or maybe you went to the same school, or maybe you both attended the same class. So I think that makes it a little easier sometimes to find people.
And I would definitely say I always forget how meaningful or how helpful it is to do this, but sometimes just reaching out to your friends and be like, hey, who do you think I should meet? I have a little networking event that I do, and one of the things, one of the ways that I meet new association geeky friends is I just say, hey, like, who should I invite? And I've been able to meet some cool people that way.
Yeah, no, I do something similar, but I tend to ask people in my network who's currently inspiring them, or who do they turn to as
That's a good
mentors?
one.
Because the thing is that like sometimes when you think about like who logically you should meet, they might introduce you to one group of people, but if you ask like who's inspiring them right now, then say, oh my gosh, so and so is doing this, and that, and it's people that might not be in your immediate sphere. So that's been really, really helpful, because with me being a part of this current year's DELP class, like we didn't have the normal ASA annual experience of being in person and meeting a bunch of people. So for me to get the same experience that past classes have gotten, I've had to kind of say, hey, who were you like, oh my gosh, this is the person I need to meet when I do X.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they might give me 2 or 3 names. And so now over a few months, that list has turned from like 3 or 4 people to I have like a list of 20 people. And I try to meet with one person like every other week, just so I'm continuing to meet people. And I always ask them that same question. So when you just like the senior leadership group, all of a sudden you get people recommending fellows that you forgot were fellows, because that fellows class is now almost 300 people. So for them to say, oh, you should talk to so-and-so, and you're like, who is that person? So now it's a new person to go cyber stalk. So that's also been really helpful.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, Alexis, you touched on something that was going through my head as you guys were giving your answers, and I wonder if anyone has an answer for this. Do you set aside specific amount of time to network? Do you build that into your schedule, or do you just kind of do it as it strikes you and as you feel the need to find help or to expand your network?
I think because I'm an introvert, I have to have that accountability goal for myself. Because if not, it's very easy to kind of like start working head down, and you don't realize that you haven't talked to anybody new in like weeks or months. And then you're like, oh, I should probably talk to somebody new. Because I know at one point last year during my pregnancy, I was studying for the CAE, and like luckily having those study groups made sure I met somebody new on a regular basis. But you could be like, you know what, this Netflix series seems more interesting than talking to somebody. But if I put it on my calendar that I need to, either follow up with someone or meet someone new, then I'm being thoughtful about continuing to add that to just my routine. Because if I don't, I will tap out. So I know if you're more nervous about networking, that's something that is helpful. So I just say at least 2 hours a month. So it's every other week, and it just makes it helpful that way.
Wow, great. Thanks. Genevieve, Alexis S., do you guys build it into your schedule or just do it as the need strikes?
I guess it's kind of both. So I'm an overachiever, so I'm on multiple committees. So I kind of have grown my networks through those committees and the people we meet on the committees and the things we do through them. So we do webinars and stuff. So it's kind of built in, but I don't know. I'm not purposeful like Alexa. I don't have it on my schedule or anything. It just happens to me. the aggressive networker, I just email someone, I'm like, hey, we're best friends now. So it just happens in my life is how it works. But that's not for everyone. Some people, you have to be a little more strategic about it, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, I work in sales and I have to do it for my job, but it's not just, I mean, it's part networking, part prospecting. And so for me, I try to be really intentional about the events that I go to and make sure that I'm doing the prep and follow up to make that time well spent. So I'm pretty good at my follow up from events and making sure that I'm connecting with the people that I see. So that kind of streamlines itself to make sure that you're doing your part to maintain those relationships, because whether you're in sales or not, your relationships are how you kind of get all these wonderful benefits from networking. So coming up with a process is definitely helpful.
Great, thanks. Thanks for answering that curveball. We have all the way on one side, everything scheduled and planned out a little bit, and all the way on the other side, not scheduled at all, and in the middle, sort of a process. So that's really helpful to hear all the different approaches. And another question we got into the chat that I'll throw out to everyone is, do you have any difficult networking situations that you've encountered that you were able to turn into a positive experience that you'd be willing to share with the group? And that's out to our audience as well. Feel free to share it in the chat if you have anything like that. I don't know if they're virtual or in person. I know we're talking mostly virtual, but
I'll do it. I'm ready. Tag me in. Okay.
okay,
So,
go ahead.
at my first adult job, it was a trade association, and all the members were like PhD scientists. And every time we would have networking events, I was just so I was just like, I'm the dumbest person here. How can I talk to these people? And so it was really intimidating to be in a room with people that were clearly far smarter than I am. And so I basically, don't tell anyone this, I basically would just like hide. So this goes against my brand. And so eventually my boss was just like, what are you doing? You have to go talk to the members. Like, that's your job to know the members. And I was just like, okay. So like, she kind of forced me into it. So having, again, that wing person to push you into things helped, because otherwise I would have just stood in that corner and enjoyed my soda all night and not talked to anyone, because it was scary as a young 20-something-year-old to be in a room full of the heads of R&D at like Hershey and Boeing. And like, these are people that are just really important. And I was just like, hi, I do the social media fun fact Fridays. Thanks for coming. I'm really important too. So, but when you don't feel important, it's really easy to kind of hide, and you just have to have someone to push you out. So I guess that would probably be like my worst experience.
That's a funny comment too, Genevieve, because I imagine most association professionals work in industries where when you're first starting, you probably don't have a lot in common. I worked with lawyers when I was 23. And my trick was I tried to learn like a question, of course, to ask. So my favorite question to ask them was like, what's an interesting case you worked on? And that prompted some very interesting conversations.
Great, thanks. And someone in the chat said they had a similar experience to you, Genevieve, working with clinician researchers. So, and I'll say that I also had a very similar experience at my first association, working with PhD and MD level laboratorians. So how I got around it, I was in charge of their board exams. So they ended up liking me by getting them all certified, but I was just put in that situation by chance. So appreciate you guys sharing that. You all have touched on this question, but if you have any specific tips to share about it, the best ways that you stay connected after a meeting, of course, LinkedIn being a big one, but any other thoughts on staying connected after a networking event?
I think LinkedIn has now become kind of like just the virtual business card. So the thing is that yes, connect on LinkedIn, but then, once you've connected, say, like, hey, here's my Gmail or here's my cell phone number. Like get that line of connection closer than just the LinkedIn, because it's easy, depending on if someone isn't as engaged on LinkedIn, they may not be checking it on a regular basis. So the thing is that you want to get that line of connection to be as direct as possible, because that means you're really going to actually keep engaging with that person. So like when I do that and I add people to my phone, I tend to kind of put an anniversary date of when we connected, so that I know that like, hey, if I let 30 days go past and I haven't, texted this number or called this number, I have a problem. because, you know, I never want people to feel like they're playing cards, that like I'm just kind of keeping as a lovely Rolodex that I'm not engaging with. So kind of figure out how to build in those metrics to kind of remind yourself to keep connecting with those people.
And do you reach out to folks when you connect with them via LinkedIn and try and get their contact info so you can get off platform? Is that part of the process? Yeah.
And I mean, LinkedIn's also added that feature that you can connect it to like your Zoom and stuff like that. So, you know, any of the new bells and whistles that the platforms are adding, use all of them, because it's going to make it a more meaningful connection, because it's easy just to have them as people that you're following on LinkedIn, but it's another thing to have them as people you can turn and ask things for. I mean, somebody that I met in a coffee chat just recently had reached out and said, hey, I can't get into this event. I know you know somebody that's there. And Genevieve knows. So I reached out to Genevieve, like, Genevieve, we got to get this person in. And it was done. And I think that in her mind, being as senior level as she was like, oh, I should be helping you because you're a young professional. And then she's like, oh, you got me in. So
it goes both ways. Genevieve, what about you? What are your tips for staying connected, other than just connecting on LinkedIn?
I'm not gonna lie, I am one of those terrible people on LinkedIn that's just friends with some people that just be friends with some people, but I still think there's some value in having those LinkedIn connections that someday you might need. I am not as strategic, clearly, about anything as Alexis. So I think probably people who I really want to connect with, I usually end up with on Twitter, because I feel like I have a better connection with people on Twitter than LinkedIn. And I have my professional Twitter, and then I have my secret personal Twitter. So the people who I really like get to know the secret Twitter as well. But I think it's all about just remembering who your sphere is and just thinking like, hey, I'm looking for people on this topic. Who can I reach out to? And just, I don't know. I'm not very good at it apparently, but everyone's going to be in my LinkedIn network by the end of the day that's on this call. So congratulations, you're welcome. I probably won't say happy birthday because I think that's weird when people just say happy birthday to you on LinkedIn and you haven't talked to them ever. But for me, I'm pretty good at remembering names usually. So if we do have in person, or if I do see you at a meeting, I'll be like, hey, I remember you. We met at this. Like, how's it going? How have you been? So I think that for me is what I'm used to make it work, is I'll remember people and I'll be like, oh yeah, we attended this 3 years ago at ASE. How's it been going since then? So I may not be as good about the daily, monthly upkeep like Alexis, but long term, I remember people and I'll be like, hey, yeah, let's connect again, figure out what we can do. So I'm not, don't listen to me is what the advice is of this stuff.
No, I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. It sounds like finding the platform that you're really good at connecting with people on. In your case, Twitter. In Alexis's case, maybe getting people's numbers and being able to text them or call them. It is really the key to keeping that connection a little more personal than just adding folks on LinkedIn. So that's really useful. Alexis S., any tips from you?
I'd say we're bringing that spectrum back, and like for me, with besides my job part of my job of networking, I mean, I think that it's real. Like, I try not to overthink it, you know, like if you're genuine and authentic when you show up, I hope, you know, that like Alexis, for example, like I hope none of your connections think that they're what did you call, like a playing card, you know, like you in our interactions, like you are authentic and genuine. So I think that if you're really intentional about how you show up when you do, like David, for example, I met David at an AMS Fest event probably 2 years ago. And here we are. Hey, David, we just connected on LinkedIn. And, you know, I think that like that length of time, like we're ready for that next conversation, whatever it may be. So I think just being present, and if you are that connector, for example, like I may have connected with some association person at ASAE 2 years ago, and then something popped up where I remembered them, you know. So I think just kind of keeping your Rolodex handy to use as a connector, as a supporter, as a cheerleader on social media, kind of gives you a little bit of peace knowing that you're doing what you need to do to contribute to the community.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And Corey in the chat said that if you find a high level of connection or alignment with someone, you might end up scheduling recurring meeting invites just to make sure you're staying in touch, whether that's monthly or bi-monthly or whatever works for that. So that's a great suggestion. Thanks a lot, Corey. And yeah, that's really helpful, Alexis, because definitely something I struggle with is not necessarily needing someone right now. So figuring out how to make that connection is really important. And speaking of that connection, oh, sorry, go ahead, Alexis.
Well, and even if it does come to a point where you're years down the, or a little bit down the way, and you got to reach out to somebody, you're at that same position. The worst that could happen is they could say no, and you wish that you maybe had more chats with them prior. But what's the value of a network if we aren't leaning on each other and asking when we need it? So the main takeaway that I think is don't be too hard on yourself, and know that when you show up, you're doing your part, and that's really the best that we can do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And, speaking of connecting with folks, we had a couple of folks throw their LinkedIns in the chat. We invite everyone, if you want to throw your LinkedIn in the chat. You might also want to throw a fun fact about yourself in there so that we can use those to connect with each other. But we'll encourage you to throw those in there, and we can compile those LinkedIn profiles and send them out to everyone on the call today. So feel free to throw your LinkedIn in the chat, and we'll make sure that everyone gets a list so that we can all connect. So with that being said, I would just love to throw it back out to all of our panelists for any final comments they may have for today on our virtual networking in general, or life advice. We'll all take it. Alexis, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. So I put this in the chat, but I had a mentor once tell me that, never assume that the other person isn't also awkward or nervous. Even those that are in really senior positions, they may still have like that 13-year-old inside that's just like, okay, what do we do? How do we make this happen? So, never think that you're the only one that might be nervous or anxious. There's a lot of people who are in senior roles that they were just really good at what they did, but weren't the people working the rooms. So never feel like you're going to be out of the fight just because you're not the one that can like wow and do all this stuff in the room. Maybe you're that person that's really good one-on-one. So just be open to that, and that people are going to be vulnerable and engaging and legitimately interested because they've been in your shoes before. So.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button there. Alexis S., any final comments?
I would say, so in my 5-minute thing, I left with, or I closed my session with a tips from Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people. And there's it's a really great resource, has been super helpful to me in figuring out what it means to connect meaningfully. And one of his sections is about how to make friends, and I don't have the tips handy, but really great resource. And it comes in, it's helpful. And then the one other thing, and I guess I might have forgotten already, but not just being an aggressive networker, because I love that, Genevieve, but I am a strategic networker. And it's funny because I said earlier, I don't necessarily want to talk about cheese. And I do get a little anxious about having conversations about weather or dogs or things like that. But I think it was, we talked about this in our prep for this event, and how those conversations are those icebreakers that help kind of build that connection. So that's something that I got out of this program, and seeing the value in the conversations about cheese, because maybe when I see any of you later on the internet, we can joke about our favorite cheeses. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind.
Appreciate that. Genevieve?
Yeah, so I think, again, I talked about it in my talk. I think people just need to remember that you're looking for something probably from networking, but that you also bring something, so that remember that you have expertise and wisdom that you're bringing to the conversation as well. And so young YPs sometimes get into the mindset of, oh, I'm new, I'm young, I don't know, I can't contribute to this, but you can. So you just have to remember that you bring value to any conversation you're in, and that we're all here to support and uplift each other. That's I put in the chat that the networking is, you have one hand forward to reach out to get help, and then you have one hand back to help the next person along, because we're all just a network. We're doing this together. Someone out there has figured out a situation that you're in and figured out a solution. So be happy to ask for help, but also give help, give back to the community and give back to the next generation or people ahead of you, just anyone. So just always sort of that servant leadership mindset of you're always kind of willing to help the next group around you.
Great. Thank you. And thanks to all of our panelists for giving your time today, and to everyone who helped organize this really, really awesome discussion. Thank you guys so much. We'll go ahead and compile all those LinkedIn links there and send them out afterwards so everyone can connect. And with a recording as well from today's session. I just want to remind everyone to please follow the ASAE Young Professionals on all of our social media platforms. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook for future information on discussions. And we also have weekly Quick Bite Wednesday videos. So be sure to go ahead and follow us on all of those social media platforms. And we hope that you'll join us again next month. We'll have another live discussion, and the topic will be underrepresented groups moving the needle. So thanks everyone, and have a great afternoon. Appreciate it.